So the first 5 episodes have kind of discussed, firstly, how Rome fell, and secondly, the rising influence of the church, and we've looked into Augustine, some of the issues like his views on, how his theological views on things like abortion and homosexuality have a major impact even down to this day. Anyway, kind of after the fall of the Western Empire, the West went into darkness. It was a pretty grim time to be around. There was lots of barbarians fighting each other, and trade kind of broke down. So, ironically, the last emperor in the East, Justinian, who had the force of arms to kind of bring back the West, didn't have the foresight to keep the academy open, the academy being where most of the philosophical and scientific work was done. And with his death, in 585, after closing down the academy for being pagan, kind of the dream of reviving the Rome of learning and of power had died. All that really remained of Rome was the monasteries and the church, and ironically, these former enemies of the state had become all that remained of the Roman state in the West. And it's in these institutions that church and scholastic philosophy, as it was known, kind of grew up, and it was dealing with two key problems which have come to the fore in this period. The first is reconciling reason with the Christian faith, and the second is about ethics. Now, I kind of want to look at reconciling reason with the Christian faith in one of the most famous philosophers of the Dark Ages, that's Boethius. He was around in about 480 to about 520 AD. Now, Boethius, he translated Aristotle's logic into Latin, but it's not for this he's most famous. He's most famous for his book called Consolation of Philosophy. Now, this was a bestseller in the Middle Ages, so you could view it as the equivalent of the Da Vinci Code or Harry Potter, but unfortunately it's not an adventure story. It's actually a chat between Boethius, who's a Roman politician put on death row for treason, and his allegorical creation, Lady Philosophy, about why life can seem to be unfair. And so he's trying to apply reconciling his reason towards his Christian faith. And one of the issues they discuss is this predestination, like, has God destined Boethius to suffer? Is it fate behind it? And so you got this problem. The problem goes something like this. So the first is that God's got two attributes. Firstly, he's all-knowing, and secondly, he's good. Now, because of being all-knowing, God knows kind of what will happen, who will choose to submit to him and go to heaven, or who will not and go to hell. Now, knowing doesn't normally equate to causing. For example, if I'm kind of observing it's raining, I'm not causing it to rain. But in this case, knowing the future almost equates to a necessary knowing, because if God didn't know something 100% was going to happen, like it was going to rain tomorrow, then he wouldn't be all-knowing. But if this is the case, then we don't really have free will, and we can't really be held responsible for our moral actions if we have free will, so surely there seems to be a contradiction here. Now, Boethius' solution to this problem is to argue that God is outside of time in eternity, kind of how we explain with Augustine, and therefore all time is present. So really, God's seeing it rain, like tomorrow, as if it was today, and therefore he's seeing the present but not causing anything. This is one way around the problem, but it doesn't really seem to solve the problem, as it creates the paradox of events happening simultaneously. For example, say, I don't know, the state of Palestine being currently owned both by the British and by the Jewish state, which seem to be ridiculous. But one other option, and kind of one that might be more appealing to the modern mind, would kind of get rid of this issue of an all-knowing God. But then we still have a similar issue, even if we do, and that is the universe really kind of deterministic, or do we have some free will? I mean, to quote Boethius, in the sequence of causes clinging to itself, is there any freedom for our judgment, or does this fatal chain constrain the very movements of human souls too? So, I mean, if we're going to get down into what this question is really asking, it's, is there any irreducible uncertainty in the universe? Because if there is such uncertainty, then theoretically we can have some free will, if it's not purely deterministic. Now, with regard to this, the short answer is, even today, we don't know. At the moment, we can predict future actions. So, for example, if a man jumps out of a plane we can predict how fast he's going to fall given his height, his mass, and the gravitational constant. But even in certain areas of physics, which seems to be one of the most deterministic and straightforward areas for the laws to apply, there are some areas of uncertainty that we can't know for at the minute. For example, we can't know the exact position or exact momentum of some very small particles because of Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. And whether it's possible for us or for any entity to overcome such limitations isn't yet scientifically verifiable. Now, this might seem to you to be quite an academic question, despite having perplexed philosophers for ages. The only kind of closer I can add to this, because it's probably not going to be solved anytime soon, was that for Boethius, his fate did indeed catch up with him, and he was executed by the Gothic king that he had allegedly committed treason against.